Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all here. My subject, as you know, is environmental and resource economics. And I want to start by stating my understanding of the theme of environmentalism. I think there are two aspects. One leading aspect is that continuing economic progress is impossible because of the impending exhaustion of natural resources. And then also that economic progress, including much of the economic progress that's already behind us, is dangerous. And it's dangerous to the extent that it is possible because of alleged harm to the environment. And I want to address both of these aspects, starting with the issue of natural resources. I think the way that the immense majority of people look at natural resources is they think natural resources are a gift from nature, and even the immense majority of economists talk of nature-given factors of production. And the idea is that these nature-given factors of production are scarce. They come from nature. We can't create them. All that we are able to do is use them up. So the usual view is we can expand our production of things like automobiles, refrigerators, whatever, but in the process we are consuming an allegedly scarce, irreplaceable supply of things like iron ore and copper, petroleum, whatever, etc. Now I'd like to present an alternative point of view, and that is to make a distinction between two aspects of nature's contribution to natural resources. I think in one sense we greatly overstate nature's contribution, and there's another sense in which we radically understate it. If we think that nature provides iron mines and oil wells and copper mines and so forth, we're enormously overstating nature's contribution. Nature does not provide iron mines, oil wells, etc. There is an enormous human contribution before you can have an iron mine or an oil well. You have to identify the useful properties of things like iron and petroleum. You have to know what they're capable of doing that's of value to us. And you have to be able to get at them in a way so as to be able to direct them to the satisfaction of our needs or wants. And in fact, this derives directly from Karl Menger's theory of goods, which was explained yesterday or the day before by one of the other lecturers, perhaps Professor Salerno, I think, that in Menger's view, we start out in considering what makes a good. He says a good is a thing. It's first of all a thing which possesses certain properties which we have identified as capable of satisfying a need or want. So there has to be a human need or want. There has to be a thing with such properties as make it possible for it to satisfy a human need or want. We also have to recognize the existence of those properties. We have to identify them. And then we have to have sufficient command over the thing so as to be able actually to direct it to the satisfaction of our needs. Now, for the immense majority of our ancestors, such things as iron, copper, they were not economic goods. They existed. They were in the ground. But in the Stone Ages, people had not yet identified the useful properties of any of the metals. And before any of the metals could become economic goods, their useful properties needed, first of all, to be identified. And then, even after people identified them, before they could become an economic good, people had actually to be able to get at them and direct them to the satisfaction of their needs. Now, for example, today, we may know that there's a great deal of iron up on Mars. I think it's iron oxide that gives Mars its reddish color. And we know the useful properties of iron, but we cannot get at that iron. We know the core of the Earth is made of millions of cubic miles of molten iron. We know what the iron could do, but we have no means of getting at it. And even if someday we can get at it, there's a further requirement which Menger didn't actually develop. We have to have the ability to get at the thing in a way that is economical. It may be within this century we'll send a rocket ship to Mars and it may come back with a kilogram of Martian iron. But if you keep the context, this would not be good if we have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to send a rocket ship there and come back with $5 worth of iron ore. The process has not actually accomplished any good. So in order for a thing to be a good, we have to know its useful properties, be able actually to get at it and devote it to the satisfaction of our needs, and do so in a way that doesn't require an inordinate amount of labor on our part. And only if a thing meets all of those requirements does it become an economic good and wealth. So all of this pertains to the human contribution to natural resources insofar as they represent economically usable, accessible goods. We are creating the goods and wealth character of these natural resources. Nature provides the material stuff, but our activity is what lends the goods and wealth character to nature. Now, so far I've stated the human contribution and shown that nature's contribution is only very, very partial. But there's another aspect of nature's contribution which is generally not recognized, and this is a truly immense contribution. I guess probably by now everyone has seen one of the CSI programs or some equivalent, and you know about crime scene analysis. And imagine that we had a crime scene laboratory out here. They could take a soil sample and do a chemical analysis of it. Now, wherever this truck pulled up and whatever particle of the earth they decided to analyze, in principle, it would always break down into some combination or other of different chemical elements. Now, if you think about it for a moment, the entire mass of the earth, from the upper limits of the atmosphere, 4,000 miles straight down to the center of the earth, is nothing but solidly packed chemical elements. Try to think of any material aspect of nature that is not some chemical element or other as yet presently known or as yet unknown. So the entire mass of the earth is really solidly packed chemical elements. And there's all kinds of tremendous energy forces with this, all of the winds, the tides, the heat from the earth's core, the discharge of electricity in thunderstorms, and maybe forms of energy we're not yet even aware of. Energy that holds the molecules, the electrons and neutrons and whatever, and quarks of atoms together. Well, the point is that nature's contribution to natural resources is not iron mines and oil wells. It is actually the totality of all of the chemical elements. It's the totality of matter and energy. What nature provides is matter in all of its elemental forms and energy in all of its forms. That's nature's contribution. And strictly speaking, nature's contribution is the matter and energy, well, first and foremost of the earth, but not limited to the earth. Nature's contribution to natural resources should really be understood as the totality of the matter and energy in the entire universe. That's nature's contribution to natural resources. Now, if we think about it that way, and then we distinguish from this aspect of nature's contribution to natural resources, we look at the narrower concept of economically usable, economically accessible natural resources. What part of nature's contribution are we able to put to use to serve our own ends? Well, that is an infinitesimally tiny fraction of nature's total contribution. Even now, if we look just at the earth, the total of our mining operations, almost the entirety, not quite, but almost, is first of all limited to the roughly 30% of the Earth's surface that is comprised of land. The 70% of the surface that's comprised of ocean, with the exception of some offshore oil wells, that is not part of what we are presently able to get access to, or have not yet been able to. And the extent of our mines is still measured in feet, not miles. So the fraction of what nature has provided just here on Earth that we are able to get at and devote to our purposes is extremely small. And if you keep these facts in mind, I think it follows without too great difficulty that the supply of usable, accessible natural resources is indefinitely expandable. We can enlarge, we can progressively enlarge the fraction of nature that we sufficiently understand and have sufficient physical power over to direct to our purposes. Now, what's required to enlarge this usable fraction of nature? Well, it's advances in scientific and technological knowledge and advances in the quantity and quality of capital equipment. Just think what fraction of the chemical elements in the earth could we get access to and apply to our ends when our means of production were limited to picks and shovels. There was the same amount of the chemical element iron in the earth in the year 1000 as there is today, in 1500, 1800. In 1800, when our technology was still essentially limited to picks and shovels, the only part of the Earth's iron that we could get at was within a fairly few feet of the surface. But now what happens when we develop steam shovels and bulldozers? What happens when we develop the ability to sink deep mine shafts, have immense machines that can lift multi-hundred-ton loads? And what happens as we increase our ability to separate compounds? I don't know which form of iron we could work first, whether it was iron oxide or iron sulfide, but I know with petroleum, first of all, petroleum only became a usable, accessible natural resource in the late 1850s. People had awareness of petroleum before that time, but just as something that seeped into streams and poisoned the drinking water of cattle. But in the late 1850s, it was recognized that you could make kerosene from petroleum, which you could use to put in a lantern and have a source of light. And so at that time, petroleum for the first time became an economic good. It was added to the list of natural resources. But we certainly couldn't get at very much of it. What kind of drilling equipment did they have in the late 1850s? You could only go down a few feet, and there were some types of petroleum compounds that for quite a while were totally useless, those with a high sulfur content. One of the great contributions of Rockefeller and Standard Oil was to develop the process of petroleum cracking that made it possible to separate the sulfur from the petroleum, and so made those deposits useful. Well, what did that do to the supply of usable, accessible petroleum? It enlarged it. What happens to the supply of usable, accessible petroleum every time we succeed in being able to drill deeper, every time we succeed in being able to move our activities into areas previously inaccessible? We're enlarging it. And similarly with all of the different elements. And so if you consider this point, the supply of economically usable, accessible natural resources today and in the past, I would say that the supply of every natural resource today, the usable, accessible supply, is vastly greater than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Why? Because with our more advanced capital equipment, our greater ability to dig deeper, move bigger masses of earth with the same labor, separate chemical compounds more easily because of more advanced scientific and technological knowledge, we are in a position to gain access to a larger fraction of virtually every useful element and compound that is to be found in the earth. Now just think how we're in a position to increase the supply of usable, accessible natural resources beyond where we are today. Consider the coming this century. Now, as I've said, we've up to now been limited to the land, but there are developments in science and technology that will make possible undersea mining operations between robotics and fiber optics and one thing and another. And just think of this. This would open up well over 2 times the land area to which, 2 times the surface area to which we've had access. What would be the effect if we could sink mine shafts, which we wouldn't even have to use people in, just fiber optics and robotics, and we could start mining not from a depth of a few hundred feet, but maybe 5 miles, 10, 15, 20 miles. What must this sort of thing do to the supply of usable, accessible natural resources? Well, obviously, the potential is there to increase this in far greater measure than anything we've had up to now. A further example along these lines, geologists have known for a long time that physically there is more petroleum in our own Rocky Mountain states in the form of shale, in rock formations rather than the usual liquid formation. But there is more petroleum on the order of a factor of 10 than all of the petroleum that exists in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, up to now, this shale has not been an economically usable, accessible natural resource because the costs of extraction are too high, so it just doesn't pay. But what will happen if and when we get a commercially feasible method of extracting oil from shale? Well, that will increase our usable, accessible supply of petroleum by a huge multiple. And then beyond that, on the horizon, there's the possibility of using hydrogen as a fuel. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. So the key is, the key to the supply of economically usable, accessible natural resources is the state of scientific and technological knowledge, the state of capital equipment, and the key to that is motivated human intelligence. If you have a free, rational society where a large proportion of the population, a large proportion of the most intelligent, ambitious people go into fields like science, engineering, invention, and business, and are thinking how can they accomplish advances, and people have the economic motivation to do so, if whoever makes any significant contribution to the supply of usable, accessible natural resources will make a personal fortune from it, well, that, I think, is practically a sufficient guarantee that the supply of usable, accessible natural resources will go on expanding for quite a few centuries to come. So the way I put it in point C, the economically usable, accessible fraction of nature's contribution can be indefinitely enlarged against the backdrop of a practically limitless nature. And if you keep this in mind, this idea that we are stuck with this scarce, precious stock of irreplaceable natural resources, and we have to be at pains to reduce, reuse, recycle, this is not an appropriate conclusion if you understand the nature of wealth creation. You'd have to do that if the world comes to be the kind that the advocates of that position would like to make it. If you have a totally government-controlled, government-run economic system populated largely by unthinking zombies and with no one having motivation to do anything, that will definitely be a world of dwindling supplies of everything, and then you'd better be ferreting through garbage pails and whatever to save whatever you can. All right, let me turn now to the next major aspect that I want to discuss, the relationship between economic activity and the environment. And the usual view is that economic activity and production are harming the environment. One thing after another is alleged to be doing some sort of damage to the environment. And I would like to argue the diametrically opposite proposition, namely that production and economic activity by their very nature serve systematically to improve our environment. And what I understand by our environment is the external material surroundings of human beings. And we can take as our starting point the fact I referred to, that the entire mass of the Earth is solidly packed chemical elements. The entire mass of the Earth, the atmosphere, the crust, the core, everything is solidly packed chemical elements of one kind or another. And that is the totality of our environment, those elements and their various actions and interactions. And whatever we do, the supply of chemical elements remains unchanged. All of our economic and productive activity, if you look at it from the point of view of physics and chemistry, all of it consists of taking various chemical elements originally found in certain compounds, perhaps breaking them out of those compounds, recombining them with other elements, and moving their locations. So, for example, we might start with iron oxide in the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, and this iron ore gets to steel mills. They break the oxygen away from it, other impurities, and they may add some chrome and nickel or whatever, and they alloy it, and then we end up with steel sheet, girders, whatever, iron in more usable forms. And similarly with all of the other elements. Now, we have the same supply of elements, but we begin, there's iron and copper, etc., resting underground somewhere, and then at the end we have the iron in the shape of girders holding up buildings, supporting bridges, forming the fenders of automobiles, the outside of refrigerators. And stop and think about this for a moment. Where is the relationship between the same chemical element, iron, where is it in a better relationship to human life and well-being? When it's under the ground or when it's in the products we produced? Well, I think obviously in the products we produced. And the whole nature and purpose of production and economic activity from a physical chemical point of view can be thought of as rearranging the relationship between the nature-given chemical elements and human life and well-being so as to make the same elements stand in a better relationship to human life and well-being. We're systematically increasing the utility of the various elements and compounds. Similarly, compounds of carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, whatever, they're resting in the bowels of the Earth. Our economic activity takes them out, separates them, recombines them, and the result is here in this hot, sweltering day, we're sitting in an air-conditioned room. We have electric light. Well, I would say those elements are serving our life and well-being much better in the way that economic activity has rendered them than if we had left them alone. So if you think of the environment as the relationship of the chemical elements to human life and well-being, economic activity, the whole nature and purpose is to improve the relationship of what nature has provided to make our lives and well-being better. We're improving the environment. That's what we're doing when we have economic activity. And I'd like to amplify this a bit and try to indicate how the populations of species and the quality of water and air support this proposition. The usual view is that we, the human race, are wanton destroyers of the lesser species. And we get daily reports almost how many have been exterminated in the last 24 hours. But that is actually not the case. If not for our activity, we would not have such species or such breeds as Angus cattle We wouldn't have Persian cats or toy poodles. We wouldn't have things like American Beauty roses. What we would have is wildlife and weeds. That would be the environment. That would be the nature of the animal and vegetable kingdom. And I would say, looking at this, that we have greatly multiplied those species of benefit to us. We are responsible for a radical increase in the population of cattle, sheep, horses, pigs, goats, whatever, chickens, all the species that are a benefit to us, including little pets, and the kinds of vegetables that are of value to us, and flowers, and we've deliberately improved their genetics through scientific animal and plant breeding. And so we have improved the species that are of benefit to us. And at the same time, we attempt to eliminate the species that are harmful to us. Every gardener wants to kill the weeds in his garden. No weeds in your garden. That's an improvement. We want to eliminate dangerous animal species. If there are animals that are threats to our lives, threats to the lives of the animals we value, like wolves, coyotes, rats, rattlesnakes, lice, whatever, well, at least before the environmental movement got very influential, we were doing a very good job in reducing the species that were harmful to us. So what we've done is not randomly exterminated species. We've deliberately set out and tremendously succeeded in multiplying the species of value to us and in radically reducing and in some cases eliminating the species that are harmful. Now sometimes there's a species that isn't a particular harm nor a particular benefit, and maybe it gets eliminated too. But I don't consider that a major tragedy. And anyone who's concerned, they're at liberty to try to save some specimens. So I would not write our progress off because the buffalo became nearly extinct, or whales might disappear. If that happened, I know I'd still be able to sleep at night. But if there's anyone who considers this some kind of huge loss, well, by all means, gather up some whales and provide for them somewhere. Now, water quality. If you ever want a good, simple test for water quality, if you live anywhere near the Mexican border, by all means, take a trip across and think about it before you do it. But you could try the water there. But carry a supply of Imodium tablets or something like that, because I think you'll find a major difference in water quality between any first world country and any third world country. Why is the water better in a first world country? Well, it's better because the first world country has an economic system that's capable of producing large quantities of low-cost pipe to transport water. They have the equipment to provide purification of the water. So the water is cleaner. A major product of the Industrial Revolution fairly early on was being able to bring large quantities of clean water to people so they could avoid some of the serious illnesses that are borne by unclean water. And similarly, the reason the Industrial Revolution and low-cost iron and steel pipe and so forth, that's what enabled us to have things like sewage systems. You know the custom of the gentleman walking outside on the outside of the lady on the sidewalk? Well, that goes back to the days when carriages would go by, sloshing up horse manure and human excrement too, because the open streets were the sewers. Before the Industrial Revolution, the horses were making their droppings in the streets, urinating in the streets. People were throwing slop buckets out the windows onto the streets. And then we got sewage systems, and we got the automobile, which did away with this incredible nauseating pollution. This represented a huge improvement in local air quality. So if you keep the context, I think you'd have to recognize that economic progress has done wonders as far as species go, as far as air and water quality go. Now, I have a reference here. I think I'll come back to point 4 in a few minutes. Let me jump to this next major heading, C, the intrinsic value doctrine. Here I've been telling you about how economic activity has improved the environment, but of course the environmentalists have the opposite view, and every time you hear them, you hear talk about harm to the environment. And I'd like to say that I think this can be explained on the basis of a different philosophical idea of what the environment means. What I mean by the environment is the external material surroundings of man, the external material surroundings of human beings. And I see the environment as deriving its value from its service to human life and well-being. I see human beings as the source of value. Value radiates outward from human beings and touches external material things to the extent that they are of benefit to the human beings. Things become valuable and good insofar as they serve human life and well-being. The environmentalists have a very different concept of the environment and its source of value. The environmentalists think of the environment as something existing in and of itself, apart from any connection to human beings, and deriving its value totally apart from any connection to human beings. They think that it has intrinsic value. They think the value resides in the thing in and of itself, totally apart from any connection to human life and well-being. Their view is similar here to the Marxist labor theory of value in a way. You may have already heard in some of the other lectures that Marx would think that something had value just by virtue of the fact that labor had been applied to its production. It was valuable intrinsically because labor was in it. Well, the environmentalists have a similar idea. They think that mountains, rivers, rock formations, they're valuable in and of themselves, totally apart from any possible usefulness to human beings. And so that's the alleged intrinsic value. And let me give you a quotation from a well-known environmentalist, two of them actually, on this subject. This is from a book review that appeared some years back in the Los Angeles Times. It was written by a man named William Graeber, and the book was by William McKibben. The book was called The End of Nature. And let me try to enlarge this. I have this quotation in my own book, and that's what's up here. David Graeber, a research biologist with the National Park Service, says this in his review of Graeber's book. Can you guys see this in the back? Can you see the text? I can try to make it just a little bit larger. Wait a minute. How about now? I can see it? Okay. Should I read it or? Yeah. Okay. This, man's remaking the earth by degrees, makes what is happening no less tragic for those of us who value wildness for its own sake. The wildness for its own sake. Not for what value it confers upon mankind. That's the intrinsic value doctrine. I, for one, cannot wish upon either my children or the rest of Earth's biota. This is child, and then other biota are worms and tsetse flies and so forth. I cannot wish upon either my children or the rest of Earth's biota a tame planet, be it monstrous or, however unlikely, benign. McKibben is a biocentrist, and biocentrist means an intrinsic value supporter, and so am I. We are not interested in the utility of a particular species or free-flowing river or ecosystem to mankind. They have intrinsic value, more value. to me, how do we get that, than another human body or a billion of them. Human happiness and certainly human fecundity are not as important as a wild and healthy planet. I know social scientists remind me that people are part of nature, but it isn't true. Somewhere along the line, at about a billion years ago, maybe half that, we quit the contract and became a cancer. We have become a plague upon ourselves and upon the earth. It is cosmically unlikely that the developed world sorry about this. That the developed world will choose to end its orgy of fossil energy consumption, and the third world its suicidal consumption of landscape. Until such time as Homo sapiens should decide to rejoin nature, some of us can only hope for the right virus to come along. The right virus to do what? Well, to get rid of the billion human beings that this character considers of lesser value than a wild planet. Now, here you have people who are saying nature is of intrinsic value, yet they sneak in some more value to me. What he's actually saying is he doesn't give a damn about the existence of a billion people plus or minus. They're of no consequence to him. Now, I think it's perfectly comparable to someone saying, my value is the gas clouds on Jupiter. That's what I'm concerned with. That has intrinsic value, and the human race can perish. Now, I think this is a mask for unbelievable hostility, hatred of the human race. There is only one possible basis on which things can be of value to human beings, and that is it has to be make some contribution to human life and well-being. That's the source of the value of all other things. But there are a lot of people who have a lot of anger, hatred, hostility. You can find evidence of them throughout history. There were crowds in the Roman arena that got a lot of fun out of watching people being eaten alive by wild beasts. There were people in the Middle Ages who got a big kick out of watching other people burn alive at the stake. And we've had mass butchery and murder not all that long ago in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Cambodia, mainland China. The world has no shortage of vicious, human-hating monsters. And I think that the intellectual core of environmentalism and its doctrine of intrinsic value is really of the same character. They're really not concerned about the environment or anything like that. They're concerned with making life difficult for the rest of the human race. And that's their whole perspective. Now, let's consider the mode of operation of the environmentalists. Got it back up. Excuse me. Well, I hope I didn't lose it. Here we go again. Now, what they do is they take for granted the enormous positive of the products that we have, our standard of living. They take that totally for granted and they ignore it. And here I'd like to ask you, I make a reference in point 4. You've heard the expression, all of you, stop and smell the roses. Well, something that no one ever suggests is take a moment, stop and appreciate the products. Just think of the kind of economic world that we live in. I imagine if you're an American, there's a very good chance you already own your own automobile. Or if you don't, you probably very soon will. Or your parents do. Now just think of what it means. You walk out of some place, you walk a few feet into a parking lot, You get into your car, you turn a key, in a few minutes you're off driving down a superhighway at 65 or 70 miles an hour. You turn on a radio, or you can have your iPod connected to it now or whatever, and you can be listening to a symphony orchestra or an opera, and you're hearing beautiful music. It can be a terribly hot night, you're driving in air-conditioned comfort. Or most of you flew here. You were 30,000 feet or more up in the air. Maybe you were drinking a martini, or maybe not of the legal age yet. You were watching a movie. Now, try to put yourself back, say 100 or 200 years, and imagine describing this to someone living at that time. My point is, we are living in an age that not very long ago was the realm of science fiction. We're living in a world of routine economic miracles, and hardly anyone has any appreciation for it. When you get out of your car, you go home, it's dark, you open your door, you flick a switch, the room is flooded with light. You open a refrigerator, you have food from halfway around the world. You flick another switch, you have a television program that comes on showing God knows what from halfway around the world. You can take a hot shower. You have central heating, air conditioning, running hot and cold water. These are incredible things. The environmentalists, they have no appreciation for this at all. They totally ignore it, and what they focus on are not at all the products, but here and there occasional, comparatively trivial negative byproducts. And that's their total focus. So if we have all of this totality of incredible wonders, they're not concerned with that at all. What they're concerned with is their fear, well, maybe the temperature of the world is going up 2 degrees. And we better mobilize everybody, control their every actions, take away all of this in order to prevent the rise in temperature. That's how they focus on things. So the way I put it is, well, it's even more than that. To get some further idea of the nature of what's going on, all of the actions that we undertake, why does an individual perform a job? Why does he produce anything? Why do you take a job? Why would you be in business to produce anything? What's your motive? But you want to benefit yourself, right? Now, if you're in business and you're producing something, you can't point a gun at people and get them to buy from you, give you their money under a point of a gun. What do you have to do to get people to buy from you? We have to produce something that they value more than the money you're asking them to pay. How do you get suppliers to supply you or workers to work for you? You have to offer them money they value above whatever it is they're selling to you. So in any private voluntary economic undertaking, we have 3 sets of beneficiaries. We have the producer himself, his customers, and his suppliers. These are 3 sets of parties benefiting. Now, there might be some outside party who possibly might suffer some harm. And what I always think of as an example, I remember when I went to graduate school, we had a very old building, I mentioned that last night, and they were starting to construct a new building right across the street. But the construction of the new building was delayed for quite a while because the owner of an adjacent building where they were excavating the foundation claimed that the excavation was jeopardizing the foundation of her building. And so she got a court restraining order until that could be worked out. So this was an outside party who was threatened with some harm. Well, whenever there is some outside party who is threatened with harm by the voluntary actions of the producer, his suppliers, and customers, if there is something demonstrable, that party has a legal remedy. But the environmentalists are not concerned with cases like that. Their focus is, cases where there is no such outside party, no one who can present any kind of recognizable grievance. What they specialize in is cases in which the different individuals involved are not producing any perceptible negative effects on anybody. They're just benefiting themselves and those with whom they deal. But if you add up the actions of millions of such cases, maybe there is some negative that now adds up to something. In effect, we have gallons and gallons of good and maybe tiny microscopic droplets of bad that no one can perceive. But when we multiply these transactions by a sufficiently large number, the tiny microscopic droplets of bad now add up to a quart of bad. Well, and now the environmentalists jump in and they zero in on that quart and they want to stop the production of all of the hundreds and thousands of millions of gallons of good. And let me give you a hypothetical example of this. 150 years ago or so, the American Midwest was being settled. And as hundreds of thousands of farmers and their families moved west, they cut down an awful lot of trees. They cleared land to establish farms. Now, it may be that when you clear so much land of so many trees, that the water no longer had enough place to go, and so maybe the Mississippi River now had to carry more water downstream, and maybe this caused some additional flooding down at New Orleans. Well, now notice, no individual farmer and his family, is he responsible for flooding down at New Orleans? No, but if you have millions of them, well, maybe now some floods result. Well, if we had had an environmental movement back in those days, they would have tried to stop the development of the Midwest in order to avoid the flooding down at New Orleans. And they would have held all of the farmers responsible for that negative environmental impact. Well, I think that's exactly the same situation with global warming. We have hundreds of millions of people going about their business, benefiting themselves, those with whom they deal, and maybe, I don't think it's proved, but let's concede it for the sake of argument, that the byproduct of all of this activity may be that the mean temperature of the world will be a little bit higher than it otherwise would have been. And the environmentalists zero in on that. They ignore the totality of all of the homes, automobiles, light, power, whatever that underlies this, and they focus only on the negative of the higher temperature and whatever might go with it. And then they think, voila, it follows, we have the right to demand an immediate 60% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. Well, that's their mode of procedure. And what's remarkable here, there's an additional aspect. You know, the environmentalists are highly distrustful of science and technology. They regard atomic power as the death ray. So nothing will ever make them feel safe with atomic power. They're terrified of pesticides. They don't even trust science and technology to produce a loaf of bread that is safe if it has chemical preservatives. But there's one aspect of science and technology that they have the most incredible confidence in, and that's weather forecasting for the next 100 years. And on the basis of that, they're willing to tear down modern industrial civilization. Now, let me try to provide a different perspective on these cases. And here I come to this heading, environmentalism, collectivism, and socialism. And I'll try as quickly as I can to indicate some respects in which environmentalism is permeated by collectivism. One is it holds individuals responsible for the negative byproducts resulting from the actions of the collective to which they belong. So here we are, you and I'm not responsible for global warming, you're not responsible, General Motors is not responsible, but if you add up the actions of maybe 1 billion or 3 billion people, maybe you might have some contribution. Well, the environmentalists proceed as though the different individuals who make up this collective, that they're responsible. This is another irony. the same collectivist mentality, if some individual murders another individual in cold blood, he's not responsible. It's the society that has caused him to grow up in bad conditions. They're responsible. But you and I are responsible for global warming. I'm not quite clear on how they manage this switcheroo, but I know it proceeds from the same underlying premise. So they assume that the individuals are responsible and therefore they have a right to stop them. Now, I would suggest that the appropriate procedure in such cases, whether it's global warming or flooding down at New Orleans or whatever, is when you can't show that individuals are responsible for any perceptible negative effects, but it's only great masses of people acting separately and independently, we should regard those negative outcomes as the equivalent of acts of nature. Nature causes flooding. Nature can change the temperature. Sooner or later, nature all by itself will make the temperature warmer or colder. So if we have unintended byproducts of the action of masses of human beings, I would say the reasonable way to regard that is as the equivalent of an act of nature, and then we should respond as we would to any other act of nature. And maybe we need to have more air conditioners to deal with global warming, more sunblock, whatever. Also what you need, the real solution, once you view it as needing to respond to an act of nature, the basic solution is going to be economic freedom. You see, the problem can be solved if nature is changing the climate. We will solve the problem if we are all individually free to respond in a way that is best for us. So farmers may have to change the crops they're growing. Some areas will become better for some things, others will be poorer for other things. People may need to relocate factories or whatever. There might be some parts of the world that can't support so much population, but then central Canada would open up, southern Greenland, parts of the former Soviet Union. There'd be a changed set of circumstances, and the way to deal with that is not by global government control. They've tried that. They can't grow enough wheat or produce enough nails. Don't let the same people attempt to solve the problem of global warming or anything of that kind. And this is where they're collectivist again. They view a problem. They see a problem and they think, oh my God, some official in a bureau in Washington needs to solve this. How can this be done? It's overwhelming. Well, imagine that we had viewed other problems that way. Suppose we put ourselves back about 105 years and we start to realize, you know, the automobile is coming. Right now, there's only a handful of them, but there's going to be millions of automobiles. And we're going to need incredible highways. And the horses, what's going to happen to all the horse breeders, the oat growers, the blacksmiths? How are we going to adjust to this? This is a terrible calamity. Or agriculture is going to decline. We have 60% of the population living in agriculture, but in 100 years, we're only going to have 3%. Where are these people going to go? Who's going to feed them? Well, you see, it's looking at things from a collectivist mentality. And I'd say the whole problem of global warming and all of these other things, there might be some actual physical issue involved, but there is no real problem. The real problem is a collectivist mentality. It's too big a problem for any government bureaucrat to cope with. But if you have hundreds of millions of free individuals, each one seeking to solve his particular part, do what's best for him, that's how we solve the problems. It gets all integrated and harmonized through the price system. Just a few words more on environmentalism and socialism. I think there's a profound similarity. All you have to do is substitute the concretes. Both of them, according to environmentalism and socialism, the individuals have to be stopped from pursuing their own individual happiness, their own individual self-interest. That's the basic idea. The government has to stop us from doing what we would otherwise want to do. Now, the socialists said the government needed to stop us from exploiting one another, underpaying the workers, from establishing monopolies, causing unemployment. The environmentalists are saying, no, that's not the reason. Now we have to stop people to avoid global warming, ozone depletion, and acid rain. But it's still the same solution, just switching the concretes. Now, I think of environmentalism as essentially being socialism stripped of its veneer of science. The socialists used to pride themselves on social engineering. 2 generations ago, the socialists were talking about social engineering. They finally realized that what the end result of this was the Gulag, and tens of millions of people slaughtered. So they lost their taste for social engineering. But now they've turned to despising engineering of any kind. They don't make the distinction. They blame, I think, a major root of environmentalism is, however surprisingly, the failure of socialism in the following way. How did generations of intellectuals regard socialism? They thought of it as scientific socialism. That was another name for Marxism, scientific socialism. So what did they think reason and science implied? Well, reason and science implied a socialist society. Well, where did that lead? To mass death and destruction. Well, instead of ever waking up and realizing that they didn't know what reason and science were, they never read Mises or anyone like that, they still think that reason and science implies socialism, death, and destruction, and they don't trust reason and science in any area. They have a suspicion and hostility to science and technology in every area, and I think it derives, if not entirely, at least in good measure, from the total failure of socialism, which they regard as being scientific and rational. Well, I'll just make one concluding statement here, which I recognize I've not given sufficient support for, but if you care to know my ideas on this subject further, I hope you'll read Chapter 3 of my book, which deals with this. And I conclude that the real problem of the world today is not at all environmental pollution, it's philosophical corruption. And it's the philosophical corruption that is causing people to see such fictitious problems as environmental pollution and many other things of this kind. Okay, well, I think I've reached the end of the hour. I don't know if you have any questions